hello again, everyone. Thank you for coming to Evolution and Islam Online Talk. This event is hosted by Center for Inquiry Canada, your community for science and secularism. My name is Onur Romano. I am a co-organizer of Victoria Branch and the branch manager for the virtual branch, and also a board member. CFIC is Canada's only national nonprofit with the mission of promoting and educating the public on critical thinking, science, and secularism. We work to equip people to make decisions based on evidence, rational thinking, and compassion. To that end, we hold events like this to provide an opportunity for you to engage with subject matter experts on a variety of topics. In these days of physical distancing, all of CFI's events and activities are provided online, available from coast to coast to coast. We will be recording Dr. Rizvi's talk for publication on CFI's YouTube channel, but will not be recording the question and answer session. To minimize background noise, we have to put everyone on mute. And after Dr. Rizvi's talk, there will be a Q&A moderated by myself, during which the audience will have an opportunity to ask questions using the raise hand feature in Zoom. We rely entirely on donations and memberships to allow us to bring you events such as this. Please visit our website or email me for more information about how to become a member or make a donation. Let me give you a little, I would like to introduce you this event speaker, Ali. I met Ali Rizvi, I believe in 2016. I think it was Niagara Falls non-conference event where he was, I had an interview with him for Secular World magazine. With him, Majid Nawaz and Armin Nawabi. That was the first time I met him. Ali Amjad Rizvi, born 1975, is a Pakistani-born Canadian Muslim, atheist and secular humanist writer and podcaster who explores the challenges of Muslims who live their faith. Ali lives in Toronto and enthusiastically, tirelessly promotes the values of atheism, rationalism, and social justice, both in word and in writ. He writes a column for Huffington Post and co-hosts the Secular Jihadists for a Muslim Enlightenment podcast together with Armin Nawabi. Ali is also the author of The Atheist Muslim, which I believe is his latest publication. Welcome, Ali.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Onur, and I appreciate it. CFI is one of my favorite organizations. And I actually, aside from all of the work we do, I met my partner at a CFI conference, and thanks to that partner, I have a child now who I care about a lot. So I always love doing stuff for CFI. Yeah, it's a fantastic organization. So I'm again honored to be speaking here. And should I go ahead and just start, or? Oh,
yes,
sorry,
please. Yes, please. Go ahead. Just start.
Okay. So yeah, so the topic that we're going to talk about today is evolution and Islam, and I was thinking about this, so we're definitely going to talk about evolution because it's a very important topic, and that'll be the focus. But to talk about evolution, it's really hard to talk about it without talking about science overall, how science works, and why science and religion are different. They're different modes of inquiry. By different, I'm being actually very euphemistic here. And to understand how we think about evolution and why it's not compatible with Islam or religion overall, it's I think a good place to start is to really get an understanding of what we mean by science, a scientific process, scientific method, and how it works. So I was raised in a Muslim family. I grew up Muslim. I was a believer at some point, and eventually I left, like many of you did, and I became an atheist. And people leave religion for many different reasons. A lot of times, especially in the Muslim world, there is a tremendous amount of oppression. People are abused in the name of religion. They're persecuted. They're jailed. There's a lot that happens, and we've all heard those stories. In my case, my rejection, I grew up in Saudi Arabia, I grew up in Libya, I grew up in Pakistan, a lot of these countries where criticizing religion was very taboo. But despite all of this and seeing all of the religious oppression around me, which impacted me, and which was a large reason I left, my main reason for leaving religion and leaving Islam was because of science. Right? It's because I had a scientific education. I am a scientist. I am a physician. I've specialized in oncologic pathology, and I've been doing this for several decades. So this is something that has been very close to me. It's been something I've been very interested in since I was a kid, and that is how my rejection of religion came about. It was my rejection of religion as truth. People say it's truth. Came through my learning of science. So as I became better versed in science and in medicine, I became sort of increasingly cautious and skeptical of people who like to demonstrate the beauty of revelation. They talk about how look at the beauty, look at everything we have around us, look at the scriptures. They try to do that by using science to support it. And this was very interesting to me. So, you'll hear people say, well, the Quran makes this claim, the Bible makes this claim. And guess what? Now we know because, science has shown this later. So they're giving science a lot of credit. And in a way, they're kind of unintentionally acknowledging the strength of the link between science and objective reality when they try to use science to try and show how great and how accurate their scriptures are. So to start with, and all of this I'm talking about, I've written about in the book as well. And if you can get your hands on it, yeah, you can go into it in more detail. I want to start by looking at 3 ways in which science and faith are different, how they differ in their methods of arriving at the truth. So first of all, science, as we know, relies on evidence. So it doesn't matter how beautiful your idea might be, how elegant it might be, science is going to throw it away brutally and mercilessly if it isn't backed up by nature. If you can't hold it up against nature through experiment, right, it has to stand up to the scrutiny of experiment. If you don't do that, then it has no value in science. Now, faith, on the other hand, is by definition, it's the belief, it's believing things in the absence of evidence. So when there is evidence, right, you don't call it faith, you call it knowledge. Right? I'm sitting on this chair right now. I don't have faith that this chair is real, that it exists. I know it exists because I have evidence. I can physically demonstrate its existence, or I can scientifically demonstrate its existence. So faith actually literally means to unquestioningly believe, to believe things without question, and even respect and revere rumors and hearsay, right? Yeah, rumors and hearsay from millennia ago, from centuries ago. That's what faith actually means, right? When you have evidence, it's not called faith. So that's the first thing. Second thing is anytime, any kind of scientific inquiry you have, it starts with the assumption that it could be wrong. And look at how important this is. Whenever you embark on any kind of scientific inquiry, you start with the assumption that I might be wrong, right? Falsifiability is a key component of the scientific method. So what is falsifiability? It's the ability of a proposition to be proven false, right? And again, this is necessary in the scientific method. How does this begin? It starts with a hypothesis. You take the hypothesis, you test it via experiment, and then the experiment will either verify your hypothesis, or it'll nullify it, or it'll leave it open based on what? Evidence, right? So the kind of evidence you collect will take your hypothesis in one direction or another. Now, how does faith operate? It operates exactly the opposite way, right? So What happens in faith is you start with a definitive conclusion. You begin with it. So your conclusions say, Jesus is the Son of God. That's a fact for you now. Or Muhammad is Allah's messenger. And you take this and then you go backward. And you go backward and you look for evidence that you can cherry pick to support. And this is, again, it's perceived evidence. It's not real evidence. It's and you take this to see what you can find to support that conclusion that you started with already. And then and usually the preconceived conclusion that you have that you started with, why is it accepted? It's not accepted because there's evidence for it. It's accepted because there are usually men who died thousands of years ago, and they wrote books, or they left behind books, and they're saying that something is true. You believe it's true, and then you go retroactively and try to find evidence in support of it. So completely opposite process to the way that science works. So in essence, science poses questions before attempting to provide any answers, but faith provides answers that it calls unquestionable, that you can't question. And this is a very stark contrast between the two. The third thing is science isn't just open to innovation and modification. It's not just open to it, it thrives on it. It lives on it, right? On the other hand, faith, and particularly when I say faith, I'm generally talking about Abrahamic faith, it's fundamentally characterized by infallibility, divinity, and these holy texts that are just immortal, they're timeless, they're immutable. You can't change them. So, and anybody who challenges or modifies all of these sort of tenets of faith and then the contents of the scriptures, what are they called? What are the words we use for people who try to innovate within religion or within faith? Blasphemers, heretics, apostates. And what has happened to blasphemers, heretics, and apostates in the past? We know their stories. They paid in horrific ways for all of their digressions throughout history. But in science, critical scrutiny and skepticism and innovation and finding holes in previous ideas and proving them wrong or building on them, modifying them, these are the key components that lie at the heart of science. They're at the core of it, and they're not only welcomed, but they're encouraged. That is what drives scientific inquiry. So these are three very, very significant ways in which faith and science differ. Now, when you look at the language of faith, the language of scientific inquiry, it shows you the same thing, right? The language of faith is really, it's scary, it's authoritative, it claims truth, it claims divinity, it claims infallibility. And in contrast, the language of scientific inquiry is deliberately humble, it's conservative. So when we talk about evolution, right, evolution is a fact. It's a fact, it's a reality, and it's verified by a whole bunch of things. I mean, you can see, when you see right now, we're in the middle of this coronavirus pandemic, and we're talking about the coronavirus mutating to be able to help it survive better. That's evolution. When you have antibiotics that from 40 years ago that just don't work on anything anymore now because the bacteria have evolved to become resistant to them, that antibiotic resistance is evolution happening right in front of our eyes. We're seeing it within our lifetimes several times over. So evolution is, you see it happening in front of your eyes. It's verified not only by paleontological evidence of, fossils and so on, but now you have molecular genetic evidence. You have you can look at the sequences of DNA, and you can show definitively that evolution is absolutely a fact. It's real. But in science, what do we call it? We still call it a theory. Okay? So this can be confusing to the general layperson who's not necessarily educated in science. When they may ask, well, if it's proven, if evolution is a fact, then shouldn't we call it a law, like the laws of motion? And this is an important point, and often I've noticed in the skeptic and the atheist community, we tend to dismiss this question, but it's understandable why they ask this, and it deserves an explanation. So let's talk about laws versus theories. Right? So in science, what is a law? A law is the description of a phenomenon. So, for instance, when you talk about Newton's law of gravity, Newton's, oh, 1 second. Sorry, guys. 1 second. I just had some bit of a glitch here.
Do you need to share
Yeah.
screen?
No. Yeah, that's what I was trying. It's okay. I'll do it later. But okay, let's just talk. I'll just talk about it. So in science, when you have a law, right? A law is, like I said, it's a description of a phenomenon. And for instance, when you have Newton's law of gravity, that describes the attraction between two objects. So it tells us what happens, but it doesn't necessarily tell us why or how it happens. So, for instance, and this is what I was trying to get, the Newton's law of gravity, I'll just read it out to you. It says that the force of attraction between two bodies is directly proportional to the product of their masses and inversely proportional to the square of the distance between them. That is Newton's law of gravity. Now, once you know about this law, you can calculate the gravitational force between two objects. Like, for example, you have a bowling ball and you have the earth, and the bowling ball is being dropped on the earth, and you can calculate the gravitational force using Newton's law of gravity. Now, what is the theory of gravity? Theory of gravity is a completely different animal. So what the theory of gravity does is it will attempt to explain how or why that attraction occurs between two objects. And when you have a scientific hypothesis, it's only going to gain the status of a theory and only going to start being called a theory after it's been rigorously tested and demonstrated to be correct. So theories are, in science, are hypotheses that have been shown to be correct via experiment and scrutiny. So theories are works in progress. That does not mean they're not true. It just means that they are modified, they're added to, they evolve, actually, so to speak, and they are adapted as more evidence becomes available. Right, they're tweaked and they adapt to the new evidence, and they're developed and they're made more robust. So let's take the theory of evolution. Right? The theory of evolution, when Darwin first proposed it in 1859, it was already pretty widely accepted in the scientific community because there was plenty of evidence from biogeography, from comparative anatomy, embryology, and several other fields. But over the 150 years or so that followed, right, you had the fossil record and you had DNA sequencing technology, and they strengthened the theory even further. So it was already a theory, it was there was a lot of evidence for it, but then you have the fossil record that comes up, you have DNA sequencing technology, you've got molecular genetic evidence, and it strengthens the theory and shows and provides more evidence for it. And now we know through DNA sequencing that not only that we don't just know about the evolutionary relationships between species that are alive today, all the species alive today, but we've also confirmed, and by confirmed I mean beyond a doubt, right? This is in the DNA. We've confirmed beyond a doubt that all living things arose from a single common ancestor that lived about 4 billion years ago. All of us, all living things. So the same thing goes for the theory of gravity. It had followed a similar kind of evolution. The one, Newton's theory of gravity was the big thing for a long time. And then the one that we have today is Einstein's theory of general relativity. That is the theory of gravity that we accept today. And this too has been developed and strengthened extensively over the years, as it will continue to be strengthened and developed in the future. So Faith has these claims of absolute truth and these immutable texts. It's not inherently adaptable or open to change. And in contrast, science adapts to change, and it works. So, a lot of our favorite evolutionary biologists, Richard Dawkins, he said, if you base medicine on science, you cure people. If you base the design of planes on science, they fly. And if you base the design of rockets on science, they reach the moon. So he's, as you know, he said, it works, bitches. That was his direct quote. It wasn't me. So this is not the kind of case that you could make for a religious activity like prayer. And pretty much every religious person I know would easily choose medicine over prayer if they were told to just pick one. If they're having a heart attack, like, well, hey, do you want to pray or do you want to go to the hospital? Which one do you want to do? Like, even the religious people will say, no, I want to go to a hospital. They know. Right? They also religious people also value evidence-based belief for pretty much everything except for their faith. So when it comes to faith, they don't apply this, but they apply it to pretty much every other decision, everything else that they do in life. And I'll quote George Carlin here. It's one of my favorite comedians and thinkers. I consider him a thinker. He said, tell people that there's an invisible man in the sky who created the universe, and the vast majority will believe you. Tell them the paint is wet, and they have to touch it to be sure. Right? George Carlin. So there are many people they'll mock others for believing in evolution, and I mean religious people. I hear them all the time when I'm having these conversations with them. They'll make fun of me for believing in evolution or believing in climate change, and be like, "Where's your evidence? Give me the evidence for your claims." And I always turn to them like, "Listen, you have this unshakable belief in the existence of angels and virgin births and winged horses flying to heaven. You believe in these things, and you're asking me for evidence for evolution and climate change, right?" And then, they'll ask you again the classic question, well, can you disprove the existence of God or his angels? And, of course I can't. And I can't disprove the existence of Zeus or Santa Claus either. And they can't either. This is Bertrand Russell's celestial teapot, the invisible teapot that is in orbit out in space. And you can't disprove that it exists. That doesn't mean that you have to believe in it. We don't believe in these celestial teapots. And if we did, if that was the framework by which we went, that if you can't disprove something, then it has to exist or it's likely to exist, then there's no end to what we could all believe, right? Fairies, unicorns, anything. So as I was growing up and I was learning about these things, and I was learning about science and how it works, I was gradually beginning to see that God was essentially just a really lazy answer to really good questions. And this is the famous God of the gaps. So for any scientific question that didn't yet have an answer, people chose to say God did it. Like, well, God did it. God did this, God, because they didn't want to say, I don't know. Human beings don't like to not know things. They want answers. It's kind of naturally ingrained in us. So, and these gaps were, before the discoveries of evolution, before the Big Bang, before heliocentrism, before the structure of DNA, where all of these things were discovered, these gaps were huge. Today, they're much more narrow because we know a lot more. So to me, growing up, it was becoming pretty apparent that God really was, and I'll quote Neil deGrasse Tyson here, the astrophysicist. He said, God is an ever receding pocket of scientific ignorance that's getting smaller and smaller and smaller as time moves on. It's a beautiful quote, and it's a fantastic way to explain how the God of the gaps works. Another problem with the God of the gaps approach is that it kills human curiosity. Right? And this is something that I've seen growing up in Pakistan and in a lot of Islamic societies where the religion is really part of the government. It's part of the education system. There's no separation of Islam and politics, or Islam and education, state education. And one of my favorite writers, Pervez Hoodbhoy, he's a Pakistani physicist and a professor. He has written a lot about the correlation between Islamic fundamentalism and the really dismal state of scientific progress in the Muslim world, which he thinks of as an emergency in the Muslim world. He thinks it's a horrible thing. He's written about it quite a bit, and to me, it was pretty obvious why this happens. If it's so ingrained in your society and so pervasive in your society, the religious education at the family level, society level, government level, education level, schools, everything. If they give you a book at birth that has all the answers to everything, what incentive are you going to have to ask questions, right? And on top of that, if asking those questions could land you in jail or get you sentenced to death for blasphemy, this is just, it doubly disincentivizes scientific inquiry and curiosity. And that is directly related, I think, to the dismal progress that in science that has happened in a lot of these societies. So I came to a point then that I used to think when I was younger, and I came from a relatively sort of moderate to liberal Muslim family, where my parents believed evolution was real, of course, but they also believed in Islam. They thought God set evolution in motion, which is similar to the view of Francis Collins. Francis Collins was once the head of the NIH, and he was the head of the Human Genome Project. He is he's a Christian, and also a believing Christian, and also one of the most brilliant scientists and physicians in the world. So that can happen. It's rare, but it does happen. He was also, incidentally, Christopher Hitchens's doctor during his last, before he was dying. And they also had some interesting conversations, but that's a separate topic. So Francis Collins was pretty comfortable with reconciling faith and scientific reality, right? And at one point I did too, but I think this position comes out of some level of cognitive dissonance that allows you to compartmentalize and separate these two things. You consciously have to make an effort not to let them mix, and this is the idea of Stephen Jay Gould. That Stephen Jay Gould had this view of the non-overlapping magisteria, or NOMA, N-O-M-A. He said that science and religion dealt with different modes of inquiry. Science dealt with facts, religion dealt with values and spiritual meaning, and there was no overlap. And this just didn't work to me, this idea. This stopped working for me for a while. First of all, if you're saying that God started evolution, and evolution we know is real, but we also know that evolution is violent, it's unjust, it's cruel, its might is right, survival of the fittest. Right? We have with cheetahs evolved to run faster, so they can catch the gazelle, right? That they have to eat and kill. They have to kill and eat to survive. And gazelles evolved to run faster, so they could run away from the cheetah and not be eaten by the cheetah, because that's how they can survive. And this is sadistic. But if there was somebody who was actually putting this in motion, and just improving the ability of both of these animals, the predator and the prey, to keep on running faster so they could survive, one by eating the other being eaten, you would call that person nothing less than a statist. But that is how evolution works. Evolution is not it's beautiful when you look at it in terms of how awesome it is and how ingenious it is as a process, but it is not benevolent. It's the exact opposite. So how could this ever-loving, merciful God who loves you use such a violent and unjust process like natural selection, where the vast majority of species die because of whatever weakness they have or lack of adaptation? and then and you would use this process to create all of the life on Earth. It's beginning to look like a bit of a stretch. So yeah, I couldn't support Stephen Jay Gould's NOMA approach either, because it's clear that he said that religion deals with different questions of value and spiritual meaning, while science deals with facts. And but the problem is that many of the claims made by religion, many of the fundamental claims made by religion, right? How the universe was created, a virgin gave birth, Jesus was resurrected and he rose after being crucified, after being killed. All these animals being saved from worldwide floods in a boat, flying horses, and these are scientific claims. These are claims about reality, about things, phenomena that we can observe and we can falsify and we can experiment and we can find out about them and scrutinize them through experiment. So these are scientific claims. And aside from all of this, there was one deal breaker for me when that stood in direct conflict with evolution, and that is the claim of Adam being the first human being and Eve being the first woman. Now, for people who truly understand how evolution works, know that this is impossible, right? They can, excuse me. So they know this is impossible. They know that Adam never existed. They know that it's impossible to have a first human. There's no such thing as the first human. Evolution excludes this as a possibility. How? Well, it's because evolution is a process that takes place over a vastly long period of time. It's a very slow process. So let's take, to understand this, let's say you take pictures of your child, your growing child, when they're a baby onwards, and you take one picture of them every single day of their face from the day they're born to age 18. 18 years worth of pictures every single day. You stack them up in order. Now, if you pull out any two consecutive pictures, right, one day after the other, that are from two consecutive days, right, you're not going to notice the difference. They'll just be one day apart. Anywhere in that stack of the 18 years, well, any two pictures is not going to be different. But if you pull out pictures that are taken 2 years apart, or even sometimes 6 months, 1 year apart, you're going to notice a difference, and you're going to notice significant differences as they're growing, and you're going to be able to better appreciate your child's growth. Now, extrapolate this to a much grander scale, and you can understand how evolution works and why there could not have been a first human. It's a process that is so slow and it's so gradual that it's genuinely astounding. And again, to bring Richard Dawkins, one of his analogies, and he's talked about how every organism that ever existed belonged to the same species as its parents, right? So, even though our distant ancestors were fish, there was never a time when you had the first Homo sapiens born to the last Homo erectus parents. That's never happened. And his Dawkins analogy is that he says, and I'm quoting again, at some point we cease to think of ourselves as middle-aged and we start to think of ourselves as old, right? But nobody ever goes to bed middle-aged and wakes up old. So now, despite this, I've met many physicians. I did my residency with a physician who had a PhD in molecular biology, but he also denied evolution, which is really interesting. So he's an MD and a PhD in molecular biology, but he denied evolution. That's how strong faith can be. And these are really smart, educated people. They're fully aware of how bacteria evolved to become resistant to antibiotics. But the only thing that they have in common, these really smart people, one thing that they have in common is a really deep religiosity. In this guy's case, he was a Pentecostal Christian, did the whole speaking in tongues and everything. Again, highly educated. we've seen this in the US on a very prominent scale with Ben Carson, Dr. Ben Carson. He's a pediatric neurosurgeon who was head of pediatric neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins, and um, by by pretty much every definition, a brilliant doctor. He was also the Republican presidential candidate for president in 2016. Now he's the sort of he's the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, I think. In any case, he was a vehement evolution denier. He said evolution is, quote, the work of the devil. He also said that the Earth's geological layers came about due to a large flood. Now, these creationists, they claim that gaps in the, well, there's a lot of gaps in the fossil record, right? And they think that this is missing evidence. And because of this missing evidence, evolution is not true, right? And again, just to remind you that these are the same people who demand evidence for claims like evolution, but also believe in virgin births and Noah's Ark. But that's a separate story. Now, this doesn't make sense. Gaps in the fossil record. Anytime you have when you're investigating a murder, there's always gaps, but you have to put in the evidence. Nobody really takes a frame by frame video of everything that happens. But it is actually really easy to falsify evolution. You don't need gaps in the fossil records to disprove it. All you need to disprove it is, as JBS Haldane once said, the discovery of a rabbit in the Precambrian era. Right? I see Leslie's holding his thumbs up. Maybe he was hoping I'd mentioned that, and so I did. But yeah, that's what you need. If you were finding fossils in the same era, say the Precambrian era, which was about 540 million years ago. Now, in the Precambrian era, if you had fossilized mammals and fossilized rabbits, and along with the first hard-shelled animals, then sure, I would be the first to say, okay, well, we've got a problem here. Evolution is wrong. But that has never happened. Everything that has been found in the fossil record is completely consistent with Darwin's theory of evolution. So moving on over to the Muslim world, we had our own sort of Ben Carson-like figure. There is a Canadian anatomist, an embryologist, and his name is Dr. Keith L. Moore, and he wrote a fantastic book called The Developing Human, which many of us and many medical schools around the world, in the US and everywhere else, used to study embryology. And so many of us, I myself studied it. And the book is it's excellent. And he explains embryology very well. And he is a world authority in the field of embryology. But in Pakistan, where I went to medical school, we had two versions of the book. There was the original, which was the one that they use all over the world. And then there was a second, really special edition that was sanctioned and endorsed by Keith L. Moore, the author, and his publisher. And this one was called The Developing Human, Clinically Oriented Embryology with Islamic Additions. That is the title of the book. So this was a book that Keith L. Moore co-authored with a Yemeni scholar in quotes, and the scholar's name was Abdul Majid Az-Zindani. So there were sections that were written by Keith L. Moore. They were completely identical to the original book. But then there were the sections that were written by his co-author Az-Zindani, with embryology-related Quranic verses. So we're going to talk a little bit about embryology here. It's a little bit of a separate thing from evolution, even though it's related. But this is just to kind of demonstrate what, this is one of the things that Muslims claim is a miracle in the Quran, is these amazing embryological claims. And unfortunately, Keith L. Moore's endorsement of this sort of Islamic editions version of it has kind of given them some encouragement in terms of this, in terms of claiming that these embryological claims are somehow amazing. So I'm just going to go through and talk about why this is not the case. So first of all, Islamic scholars usually don't have any real background in science, but they do tend to always tout the Quran's references to embryonic and fetal development. They say this is some kind of miracle because this was written 1400 years ago, and how could they have known all these things? So by talking to Keith Elmore about this, Az-Zindani was pretty successfully able to gain his endorsement. And again, internationally respected embryologist. He got his endorsement. So in the foreword to this book, the special edition, Islamic Editions edition, Keith Elmore wrote, quote, "I was astonished by the accuracy of the statements that were recorded in the 7th century AD, before the science of embryology was established. And interestingly, the acknowledgements page listed a number." No, wait, sorry, that's not the quote. So yeah, he was astonished by how how accurate he thought these statements were. Excuse me. Now, yeah, so unrelated to this, and what I was going to read next is I'm just going to show you the acknowledgements in this Islamic Editions embryology book. Share my screen really quick. There you go. Can you guys see this? From the acknowledgements. Number 6. This is one of the people who helped this project, Sheikh Osama bin Laden. And this was way before 9/11. So he endorsed Keith Elmore's Islamic edition of his book. So I don't know what to do with that information. I don't know whether it's relevant, but I just thought it was interesting. I'll just let you know. Not a very scientific thing I'm doing here, but still, it's entertaining. So yeah, so back to what we were talking about. Now today, when the people ask more about this, he doesn't talk about it. So a few months after 9/11 happened, the Wall Street Journal asked him. They did an interview with him, and all he said was, quote, "It's been 10 or 11 years since I was involved in the Quran," and that's it. He just left it at that. So how did this happen? How did Moore land himself in this mess? It started in 1980. He was invited to lecture at King Abdulaziz University in Jeddah. And while he was there, the embryology department approached him. They said, how about we write this book with Islamic editions? And, they sat down, and he was impressed by what he heard. And this thing happened. So let's talk about some of those verses about embryology that appear in the Quran, right? So let's start with verse 39:6. And this says that God creates us, quote, "in the wombs of your mothers, creation after creation, within 3 darknesses," or the, quote, 3 veils of darkness. Now, these 3 veils are the really impressive part, supposedly, where they say that, oh, well, you've got the abdominal wall, you've got the wall of the uterus, and then you have the chorioamniotic membrane, which houses the fetus. So then that's where all the fluid is. And these are the 3 layers, or the 3 veils of darkness. But, this isn't really true, because none of these things are, it just depends on how you look at it. The abdominal wall is made up of many different layers. There's subcutaneous fat, there's a muscle layer, and so on. Same thing with the membrane. The chorioamniotic membrane is called that because it's made up of 2 components, the chorion and the amnion. It's 2 separate membranes. So if the Quran had said 5 veils or 6 veils, you could still find a way to make it accurate. Right? But the question is, how did they know this? How could they know what was happening inside the uterus? And this is it's amazing to me that people find this, really astonishing, that how could they find out what happened in this? And there are many scientists in the past. There's many Greek scientists as early as the 3rd century, BCE, who did dissections of human cadavers, right, including pregnant human cadavers. Right? In wars, there are documented incidents of people slicing open pregnant women in war. Right? You actually see this in the Hebrew Bible, in Hosea 13:16. It's also something that was practiced by ISIS. So I mean, really cruel, but it's not inconceivable to think that they knew what was going on with these three veils. But then they go down to the microscopic level. The Quran also mentions a sperm drop, right, in Surah 23, or a sperm drop mixture in Surah 76, from which humans develop. And the miracle here is when they say, the Quran says sperm drop mixture. And the Arabic for this is nutfatin amshajin. So a lot of Islamic apologists say that this means a mixture of the sperm and the egg. But it doesn't say that. It doesn't say mixture of the sperm and the egg, and there's no evidence for it. Moreover, Aristotle, way before Islam, had proposed the exact same thing. He proposed a mixture of sperm and menstrual blood. Hippocrates used to think that there were both male and female sperm. So this idea of a mixture, the fact that it mentions a mixture very generally, is some kind of miracle, is not surprising, and it's not original. Right? Surah 53 says that God created both the male and the female from the, quote, sperm drop. Right? And people say, well, this, because he said both male and female from the sperm drop, then that has to mean that the sperm, because we know now that the reason that you're male or female is because of the sperm. The sperm is going to be either X or Y, and the egg is always X, and then it's basically up to the sperm to decide whether you're going to be a male or female. So they look at this as evidence of as the Quran saying that the sperm determines both male and female, which means that it can determine biological sex, which we know to be true. But again, going back before Islam, back to ancient Greece, this idea that the male contributed all of the genetic material for the embryo, that everything came from the sperm, was pretty accepted. The uterus was just considered a housing area, and the Quran also verified in Surah 77, the uterus is described as a firm lodging for the embryo. And this idea was commonplace again in the Greeks. So a lot of what you see when it comes to the embryological claims in the Quran are derived from Galen and Aristotle and their writings. There's one of the words that appears in the Quran again is alaka. Alaka means, it's in Surah 23 and in many other places. It's translated sometimes as a blood clot or clinging clot, a leech or leech-like, depending on the translation that you're reading. And they say that, well, this is a miracle because that's what the embryo looks like. It looks like a blood clot, or it looks like a leech. And you can dismiss it outright because neither the embryo nor the fetus looks like a leech. It just doesn't. Right? And this is one of those things where you have I don't know if you've heard of the Texas Sharpshooter fallacy, where there's a Texan, I don't know why it's a Texan, but that's what they call it, Texas Sharpshooter fallacy, where there's a Texan who shoots his gun randomly at the side of a barn, just randomly, and then goes and draws a circle around the densest group of shots, and then says, "Hey, look at how good I am." Right? And it's when the process is completely random. So throughout its a development, an embryo to the fetus and so on can look like a whole range of things. And you've seen those memes online where you have an elephant embryo and you have a human embryo and you can't tell the difference. This happens everywhere. You can, depending on the stage that you take the picture, it can look pretty much like anything. So how did they know this? They say, there's a blood clot or whatever it is. Even if that was the case, why is this a miracle? And this is something that confused me even when I was young, even when I was relatively religious, because often in Pakistan, we used to bring home eggs and some of them would be fertilized. Now, I don't know if you've ever cracked open an egg that is fertilized, but you open it up and you see a little red spot that looks exactly like a blood clot with little sort of arteries and vessels going around it. it's very easy to see. You see that. So, to me, I thought it was maybe somebody cracked open a fertilized egg and they just saw it look like a blood clot, and like that's what the embryo looks like, because they know eventually that's going to develop into a chicken. And that applies to everything. All you need, and Aristotle actually did this, is you just need to take a fertilized chicken egg at different stages of development, open it up at different stages of development, and every observation that you see in the Quran that is accurate, you can observe. So unless they had fertilized chicken eggs back then, right? And again, Aristotle actually did this and published his writings on it. Unless they had that, unless they didn't have it, there's no way that this is a miracle. It's not. It's just simple observation. So this is kind of what happens with the claims of divine authority, is that you read these things and you see something in them that there isn't, and it's so easy to sort of, you just need a little bit of critical thinking to analyze it. But when someone is telling you in a way that is so amazing and majestic, and you feel awe, like, wow, that's amazing, but it really isn't. It isn't. I mean, if you want to know how things actually work, often the answer is right there in front of you, and you can poke a hole in it in a second. So for me, learning about this sort of really, one last thing I want to say just about the embryology, because I'm fascinated by it, is that in addition to all of these things, one thing that the Quran does not mention. It never mentions the ovum. The egg and the ovum, the female component of it, is not mentioned at all anywhere in the Quran. So if you have any kind of detailed account of embryology that doesn't mention the ovum, that's actually more than half of the genetic component of any human being. By the way, we get 37 extra genes from our mothers than we do from our fathers, because we get all of our mitochondrial DNA from our mothers. So that's actually more than 50% of what makes us up. And if you don't mention the ovum, then you're far from a miracle. So learning about this contrast between real embryology and Quranic embryology showed me how science really illuminates things, illuminates ideas, illuminates facts, and religion obscures them. And the clarity and the transparency of science, supported by experiment and evidence, you can rely on. Religion, on the other hand, with its the use of reward and punishment and fear to impose all of these sort of questionable ideas and values and beliefs, they can't be relied upon. So one thing they say is science answers the how questions, religion answers the why questions. This is a very, very common thing. I'm sure that all of you have heard it, and it just sounds a lot like Stephen Jay Gould's Noma idea, that it's a very pleasant, everybody gets along, there's space for everyone here, but it isn't true. So religion does not provide answers. It doesn't provide any kind of answers to how questions or why questions. It makes them up. Right? So the amount of evidence for the claim that Adam and Eve were banished from the Garden of Eden, or in Islam they were sent down to earth from paradise because they were being punished for eating forbidden fruit. How much evidence is there for that? The same amount of evidence as there is for the earth being held up by a giant invisible turtle. There's none. There's no evidence. It doesn't provide any answers. It's not the answer to a why question. It's not the answer to a how question. It is just complete nonsense. It's not true, right? So if you say that religion addresses the why questions, sure, it attempts to try and answer them, but right now where we stand, if there is something that science can't answer, if there is something that science cannot answer, you can bet that religion cannot answer it either. It cannot answer these questions. And religion doesn't just speak to the why questions, right? it makes very strong how claims, like how the earth came to exist, how human beings were created, how women were created, you know, from a man's rib. So these are claims that these aren't just why questions, they're how questions, they're scientific claims. So we know about this as well. So why do people like to draw on both science and religion? There is a good reason for this. We are human beings. We seek answers. We like to solve mysteries. Imagine, you know, say you're in a movie theater. You know, don't go to movie theaters right now. Everybody, stay home. Just watch Netflix, but do it at home. But supposing you're at a movie theater when all this is pandemic stuff is over, and you are watching a mystery or suspense movie that it builds up this brilliant mystery murder case, and you really want to know how it's going to be solved, and you're at the edge of your seat in anticipation. And then right at when you're about to find out, at its peak, it ends. It doesn't explain who did it, how it was done, and why. Would you be frustrated? You'd be very frustrated, right? Because you're here, you're looking at this thing happen, unfold in front of your eyes, and at the end, you don't have any resolution. So some people are more impatient than others, and they will take any answer they can get. They're going to want to know. You know, human beings are interested in stories. They want to know how this happened. They want to know the explanation. They want a resolution, some kind of closure to the stories that they find compelling. But there are others who want to ask questions, and they're satisfied asking questions, right? As you know, if you have kids and or a preschooler who constantly says why over and over and over again for everything, you know that this is pretty natural. When I grew up, the answer to that final why was God did it, right? And this was not satisfying for me. When I found out about, and I'll talk about another theory, the Big Bang. When I first found out that the universe started with the Big Bang, first read about that, I wasn't satisfied. I was like, this can't be the beginning of the universe. Who created the Big Bang? You know, this is an event. Something must have preceded it. There had to be some sort of cause, a first cause. Where did all of it come from? And just like with evolution, I couldn't tell myself that the Big Bang happened because God did it, because that was lazy, it wasn't interesting, and that just didn't come to me as somebody who had a scientific proclivity and a sort of who was inquisitive by nature. And that's the thing. Once you believe that a supernatural God created the Big Bang, you can really believe in anything. And you know, what's to say that angels, talking snakes, winged horses don't exist? And you can turn your, you know, any adult mind into a cesspool of irrationality. Now, I wanted to know what happened before the Big Bang. And for me, this was the moment when I let go of religion completely. I dabbled in and out of it. I'd become an apologist. I used to do the liberal interpretation, you know, the Sufi sort of spiritual aspect of religion. I went through all of these phases, but I completely let go of it when I read about the Big Bang, and specifically read about, you know, what could have happened before it. So I learned that, you know, from reading Stephen Hawking, Carl Sagan, and people like this who had a tremendous influence on me when I was growing up, that the Big Bang wasn't just the beginning of the universe, but it was the beginning of time itself. And this is a really, really strange idea, and it's also a beautiful idea. When you say beginning of time, it doesn't really make sense, because if time doesn't exist, there's no such thing as beginning, right? The words that we use every day nowadays are related to time. You know, when we say before or after, when or then or now, later, first, last, you know, today, tomorrow, all of these words, they only exist because time exists. If time doesn't exist, then none of this is possible. So if the Big Bang was the beginning of time, that means that when the Big Bang happened, there was no such thing as time. Time didn't exist. And, you know, this is something that there's a quote, and I can't remember. I think it was J.B.S. Haldane who said that the universe is not only queerer than we suppose, but queerer than we can suppose. So without time, there is no such thing as before or after. And when you don't have a before and after, there's no such thing as cause or effect, because cause comes before effect. And when there's no such thing as cause and effect, there is no creator or creation, because a creator would cause the creation to exist. These are things that have temporal relationships. One happens before the other. So I think I heard Brian Greene once point out, he said, when you say what happened before the Big Bang, it's like you're standing on the North Pole, you're at the top of the world, you're standing and the North Pole is between your feet. And I tell you to walk north. What are you going to do? You're just going to tell me that doesn't make sense. I can't walk north. I'm standing on the North Pole. Where can I go? Because any direction you walk in from the North Pole is going to be south, right? So you can't go north of the North Pole. You can't go before the Big Bang, because there's no such thing as before. And now this is just one of the theories, and I'll get to that in a bit, but I just want to illustrate a point. Stephen Hawking, he said that this was like looking for the edge of the Earth, because the Earth is a sphere. So there are many different analogies, but to quote Stephen Hawking, he said, quote, "You can't get to a time before the Big Bang because there was no, quote, before the Big Bang. Since time itself began at the moment of the Big Bang, it was an event that could not have been caused or created by anyone or anything." Now, how it's complex and it's bizarre, but it's so simple at the same time. And this completely blew my mind. It's impossible for the human mind to imagine time itself slowing down, speeding up, stopping together. We can't imagine it, right? But we do know that this is true. We know that time ticks at different rates, depending on where you are in the universe. So where there is less gravity, time moves faster, like up in space where there's the satellites and everything. The GPS satellites, for instance, where they are, there's less gravity, so time moves faster, slightly. And on near the Earth, where there's more gravity, time moves slower. Now, if we took, and our GPS systems have to correct for this time difference. So this is real, it's a fact. They have to correct for them. And if our GPS systems did not correct for them, they would be off by about 10 kilometers a day, which accumulates to about 300 kilometers every month, right? So some religious people will say, well, this is because God created the universe outside of time. And this doesn't make sense either, because now we know that space-time are interwoven. They're both integral parts of the fabric of the universe. And if you don't have any such thing as time, all of the laws of nature just collapse. There's no such thing as a universe without time. So, and I'm going to conclude now. Unlike the Abrahamic creation myths, all right, there's a lot of strong mathematical and scientific evidence that supports this theory. Although there are several other theories, right? And that's not the point. The idea that there are other theories, and some people believe in an oscillating universe or other ideas of the universe, that's all. I mean, all of this is being explored right now. But what really moved me and what blew me away about this were the possibilities. The fact that this is something that is scientifically plausible, right? And on the other hand, in the Quran and the Bible, I was reading, well, God said, let there be light, and there was light. And whenever I quote God, he's got an Indian accent. I don't know. It's been like that since I was a kid. And all of these ideas, they made these holy books seem so small. They made them seem so sort of human. There's not a scintilla of divinity that came through when I read them. So why was a supposed creator of this unfathomable universe, why is he advising us on how much our daughters should inherit compared to our sons? Why is he so concerned about punishing those who oppose his authority, right? This is supposedly the being that created nebulae and time-distorting black holes and hundreds of billions of galaxies and stars. why is he so insecure that he considers it just an absolute requirement that all of us kiss his ass 5 times a day in prayer, if you're Muslim? Why is the creator of the inanimate double helix DNA molecule, which codes for the single cell zygote to multiply and differentiate into a complex human being within just 40 weeks, why would this being fill up just a few books that he sent down mysteriously to humanity with all these fables about, men living in the bellies of fish, or men delivering 200 foreskins to a king so they can marry his daughter? Like, why is he preoccupied with these sort of this foreskin collection? So, where am I right now? I'm open to the possibility of some kind of higher power. So the God of Spinoza, something abstract, the laws of nature. When it comes to that, I'm agnostic. But when it comes to the God of religion, a personal God in religion, I'm a complete atheist. Right? These books, they don't seem like anything more than ancient collections of fairy tales, and I could never understand how so many educated adults could actually believe them, and didn't just believe them, but they were willing to kill for them. They were willing to die for them. Right? And I had heard so many apologetic interpretations and explanations of these verses and these books, but none of them could ever override for me the wonder of reality, just the way that reality is. And reality is the most effective antidote to faith. Those who believe, I would say only this: if you do believe that a God created the universe, why go to a Messiah or a book from thousands of years ago to get closer to him? Why not study his creation? It's quotes, creation in quotes, that is all around you. And the study of this creation is called nature. And the study of nature has a name. It's called science. And the language of science isn't Hebrew. It's not Aramaic. It's not Arabic. It's mathematics. And mathematics stays the same whether you're in Israel, the West Bank, or the moon. Why would you rely on faith without evidence? Why would you rely on faith without any evidence when the evidence itself is so much more breathtaking? To me, the beauty has always lied. The beauty lies in real questions, not false answers. And that's it.